Sometimes we get things a bit wrong. The process of reviewing games can be a bit knotty. What kind of people, what kind of groups did you play the game with? And in what environments did you play the game? Did you play it on the worst day of your life, perhaps? Is that a factor? Did you get all of the rules completely right, or did you just make up some of them for fun? We try and account for this stuff and hammer out a good number of plays of a game before dispensing our judgment. And sometimes we can put out slightly odd takes that then our brains and hands of the future don't necessarily agree on anymore.
Yeah, and it's honestly just amazing that that's never actually happened in the entire history of Shut Up and Sit Down.
Well, hold on, I was just leading up to the point that
our excellent and robust glowing video on Dune Imperium is just another example of that. Yeah, no, correct. Yeah, you're right.
But you didn't even like it when we reviewed it.
If you question me one more time, I will play the footage.
Well, go on, play the video.
There's a really delightful chunkiness here without the components becoming over the top and bloated.
Yes,
Making
I
money
agree.
feels
It's a good game.
This one's pretty good.
It's a 10
Get
out of 10.
Bon on the phone, because this man's got the jam.
Yes.
Oh, this guy
Oh.
knows what he's talking about.
Well, Tom, all I'm saying is we can go back and talk about it again. We can go and do a little retrospective.
Well, I mean, my opinion hasn't changed at all, but sure, yeah, we can do it.
All right.
Go on then.
For those not in the know, Dune Imperium is a marriage of the two long-distance lovers of board games, putting personified chunks of wood onto cardboard and randomizing the order of personally selected bits of paper. Dune Imperium's hot sauce, however, is the sweaty, passionate intermingling of these two systems. A worker can only visit a space on the board if you have a corresponding card to send them with it. A worker can only visit a space on the board if you have a corresponding card to send them there with. I'd like to visit Benjamin Gesserit, please. Here's my card, John Jabbar. So players are taking turns visiting spaces, blocking those actions and opportunities for their opponents wherever possible, collecting the 4 great resources of Dune: water, spice, solari, and silica gel packs. Seriously, this game comes with so many of these things. It's try enough, Paul. Let it go. Players are also making new friends and adding them to their deck, ditching old ones in order to curate their cards, ultimately seeking to obtain the coveted treasure of Dune, the desert planet. It's victory points.
10 points will get you the win, but most of them aren't garnered through such simple means as collecting resources and making friends. They're grabbed either by allying with the big galactic players on this side of the board here, or by winning the combat, a feat that's about as difficult as removing one's hand from a Dune 2 promotional popcorn bucket. Viewers from the future, that joke will have aged beautifully. The big kicker of Dune Imperium, then, is that it's a fusion of a fusion. A deck builder and worker placement mashup that's further combined with a spritz of head-to-head combat. The plot thickens. Oh, such a thick plot. That's a little too thick. Can you add some water, please?
It's so claggy.
It's so thick. Many of the spaces you send your workers to on this board will have you launching troops into the combat to compete for a special bonus reward at the end of each round. Now, this starts off as a very simple auction, where whoever bids the most human life is gonna be the winner. But as the game progresses and cards get a little bit spicier, this game starts to have as many swings as the Super Bowl.
That's football! I found a pencil on the floor underneath your table as well.
That's really nice.
For you, that's for you.
Thank you. Cards not used to play workers to the board are instead revealed at the end of your turn, allowing for catastrophic swings of fortune if you've put your chips in the right place. What might look like a sure win for one player might completely collapse from under them if they've not got the cards to back up their troops. What to play and what to hold back is a daring dance, not entirely dissimilar to the fantastic Arctic Scavengers, which we reviewed all the way back in Tom Look This Up later on.
And it's really good, isn't it, Tom?
We could spend ages talking about who was right, who was wrong, and what's factually accurate, and what's proven by the record. But we don't need to rehash all those opinions again. They were thoroughly hashed in your Dune Imperium review. And now I've come round to your way of seeing things, having played the real game on a real table with my real friends. What? I don't want to just repeat that review back to you as some roundabout revisionism that has the energy of me trying to scrub my critical slate clean like I'm trying to get blood out of a carpet. But I have completely 180'd on my opinions of this game. Playing it on Tabletop Simulator, playing it like a regular deck builder, it led to a whole lot of frustration. So I'm just really happy that I've come back to play this game on a real table where it really does sing, for all the reasons that Matt highlighted in his excellent video review. You should go and check that out if you haven't watched it already. But I do still feel like I've got a few bits and bobs to share, having played this game now a whole bunch. So with that in mind, it's time for Tiny Tom's Tiny Review.
In a tiny room, there was a tiny house. And in that tiny house, there lived a tiny man named Tiny Tom, a tiny reviewer of tiny board games.
What did you think was going to happen? That we were going to do a tiny review, or a tiny man reviewed a tiny board game in his tiny house? This is your fault. You did this. You did this to him. You did this to all of them.
I think my criticism of Dune Imperium at the time, that its two halves didn't mesh into something more interesting, was pretty wildly off base, now having played the game a whole bunch on a real table. Do you remember the pandemic? Me neither. Those 370 hours in Tabletop Simulator were just for fun. Dune Imperium was one of the games that we played a lot on that platform, and I think we broadly realized that it's an environment that rewards sharp and solitary puzzles, clean designs with limited friction and interaction, sanitized and elegant boxes. Dune? It's just a little bit trashy. And not in a bad way at all, in a thematic and exciting way. Not puzzly and solitary, but alive, interactive, scheming, and messy. I said that the two halves of Dune Imperium didn't mesh, that they created messiness, but that was a criticism not cognizant of what Dune Imperium wants to be. The friction created by the mashup of worker placement and deck building is intentional. It pushes you towards opportunism, not necessarily doing things because they are definitely strategically correct, but because they feel right. Your strategy might pull you one way, but it's far more rewarding to be adaptable to the micro plans that bubble up in your hand on any given turn. Messiness is a natural fit with the deck builder of it all. Squeeze the hand you have right now. The Undaunted series is packed with these moments. Sure, you want to keep that commander, but trashing him for initiative might let you pick off that enemy rifleman that's causing you so much trouble. Dune Imperium is exactly the same. Do you want to play that Bene Gesserit card in your hand? That'll bump you up on their track and get you a guaranteed point, but you might want to play something else instead to block Matt from that big pile of spice that he's been saving up for. Decisions. Your hand might force you to pick one of those options, and so might your timing in the worker placement round. The two systems gel together far more beautifully when you realize that the pain of working within those limitations is a huge part of the intent here. It's not a game that wants you to build a svelte deck that's fine-tuned to crunch out the same thing reliably. It wants you to hire a cast of unreliable characters that will help you through a knotty pickle.
Knotty Pickle is the name I chose when I started working as a professional stripper.
Okay.
I'll put an advert on.
Where once was paint, now there ain't. Get yourself out of a knotty pickle and into our knotty pickle.
Being inherently limited in your available actions also helps with the pace of decisions within a turn, reducing a smorgasbord of possible directions into a select few moves. But Dune also puts in work to make those decisions between turns snappy and impactful. There's only a few cards in the market you'll be able to afford, and even fewer that will be great prospects for what you're working with right now. Now, in one sense, that's a frustrating lack of control. A knowable market lets you make a reliable deck. But in another sense, it's borrowing from such genre greats as Slay the Spire, where the design locks in place around a core of shifting markets that don't let you build for the deck that you want to have, but the deck you currently have. And look at that! Slay the Spire and Undaunted mentioned within just a few paragraphs of each other. Dune Imperium, at least, in great critical company.
It's a good game. It's a good game. I tried to tell him.
Yeah, you did. I've got bad things to say about it now, though.
Oh, cool.
My problems with Dune Imperium, then, lie in the way that those fearsome feelings of the early game get eroded as things press onwards. Believe it or not, my biggest issue is this. The rotating first player marker. It doesn't actually rotate like that. I'm using special effects, like the ones employed in Dune 2, in cinemas now. Early on in the game, the worker placement feels lethal. Racing for spaces is impactful because you've got so few resources that what you can do is a really small possibility space. And other players, you can count what resources they have as well, so you can count them out of certain spots. It's really tense, it's really exciting, it's very readable and knowable. So Matt can't go to the Great Flat this turn, so maybe I'll block off Quinn's at the Spacing Guild because I know he wants that point. And Pip can't go there either because she used Seek Allies and Diplomacy last turn. Oh, I'm such a clever boy. It's a clever boy Christmas for Tom. There's so much visibility in what players can do, from the cards they've got in their hand to the resources they've got on their player board to the contents of their starting deck. It's also knowable, it's also visible, which makes it tense and exciting. In later rounds, though, players are broadly both card and resource rich, with many spaces available at their disposal from any given hand at any given time, especially considering the various resource conversion options given by these free-to-play plot cards. They turn expectations on a dime. In the late game, it can often feel like turn order matters more than anything else, with little in the way of mitigation. Not getting the space you want feels less deliberate, it feels less considered.
I don't entirely agree with your thoughts about the first player system in this game. I think that yes, people do get rich as the game goes on, but also the most expensive things are such explosions of excess that people immediately become quite poor again. I think what I do agree with, though, is that this game is definitely best with 2 or 3.
Ooh, it is.
And with 2, it's lovely with the little very easy robot thing. Then it becomes much more a case of going, well, yes, there is a chance they might be able to get that extra spice and then spend it to do that next turn. So maybe I should do that right now.
Yeah, with 4 it can feel a little more chaotic with that kind of
100%.
stuff.
I can
Definitely
see that.
less intentional. Definitely in 4-player games, I'll look at my hand and be like, well, I can go here or here, but all those spaces are taken. And that can feel a little bad when those people aren't taking those spaces to deliberately block you.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, that's not exactly a giant deal-breaking criticism. Dune Imperium takes roughly 1 board game's worth of time to play, and by the end of the experience, flagging folks might simply need that fire and forget attitude that's needed for the soupy unknowability on display here. It is natural that an escalating conflict has escalating confusion and chaos, but my goodness, I just really like that scrappy and tense early game. So saggy late game aside, Dune Imperium, for me, it's a great game. It's a fantastic box. I really like it. Not 10 out of 10. That's very high. But it's very good. It's a very good game. Let the record show that I've changed my mind.
But it is expansion time. Dune Imperium had 2 smaller expansions that came out, Rise of Ix and Immortality, both offering a whole heap of new cards and modifying the board itself in a few key areas. Rise of Ix sweetens up this top right-hand side of the board, adding a few new Chome spaces. For those not versed in the language of the wider Duniverse, Chome, of course, means a very short but very wide Combined Honnête Ober Advancer Mercantiles. These spaces add a shipping track that you can yo-yo up and down for fun bonuses, tweaking the balance of the game to make the Spacing Guild a lot more useful to hang out with, after their frankly less than stellar showing in the original game.
Boo!
I know, I didn't write that joke, Tom, you did.
What?
The real attraction today, though, it's Ix, a planet full of cool technology that you can borrow in order to Dune harder than anyone else is Duning at the table. Technologies are expensive, but they get you extra powers, whereas dreadnoughts can be summoned into combat where they have the strength of 1.5 standard Dunemen and merely 1/16 of the power of a standard reference pair. It also adds new leaders and a truckload of new cards, turning your Dune game into a fuller, richer experience. Or does it?
Running the very real risk of having to make a I was also wrong about Dune Imperium Rise of Ix later down the line. I don't love this box.
Continuing the Tom I was wrong world tour.
We'll do it for every single box featured in this video. No, I don't know. I don't like it that much. I feel pretty similarly to it in the way that I felt about, or we felt, about Twilight Imperium Prophecy of Kings when we reviewed that.
It does feel like a addition to the game for folks who'd already played the base game an awful lot and were really hankering for some fixes and some spice, pardon the pun. And yeah, I do feel like now going into it, it's like it pushes the game into a direction that makes it more robust as a game you play again and again and again and again, maybe.
Sure.
But it pushes it away from all the things that I like about the base game.
That makes sense. It is clearly good. It just does a couple things that I don't quite love. The space.
Couple of things that give you the icks.
I'm sorry.
No, you should. You f***ing should be. It's clearly good. It just adds a couple bits and bobs that I'm not quite that fond of. The Spacing Guild is where a lot of the focus of the expansion is placed, propelling them from people who you only spoke to in order to borrow their highliner to instead be everyone's BFF. The bonuses that come with aligning with them are just unmissable in how much value they offer players in a single action. I'm also not in love with the Dreadnoughts, these big chunky blocks of combat strength whose invulnerability makes them take a little bit of the risk out of combat, maybe? And this is controversial. BGG seems to think that Rise of Ix is an essential piece of the Dune Imperium puzzle, and I don't necessarily agree. I don't think it makes Dune Imperium any more of the game that I want it to be when I play it.
And for someone who said the same thing about the expansion for Twilight Imperium 4 and had lots of people very unhappy, I just want to say I don't feel like I played enough of Rise of Ix to have an opinion on it, which means
it's just me.
You're on your own with this. See ya!
Oh boy, just be nice, please. Dune Imperium Immortality, however, I think it's really silly.
It's really silly, and that's
It's good. It's a good thing. It's great.
Adds a whole new bunch of cards and a grafting mechanic.
Cards get bolted onto other cards, imbuing them with extra symbols and effects. Particular highlights include blank slate, a vacuous Kendall that you can mold to your heart's desire, dissecting kit, tear apart the thing you just grafted to that Ken for money, chair dog. It's chair dog.
What's his deal?
It's chair that's also dog. What's not his deal? Go get it, chair dog. Most of these cards come from a special standalone deck that you can spend gloopy green currency cubes on to purchase. And a new board gets added to the game, which pushes players towards another extra mini-game of collecting scarabs for another source of precious victory points.
The changes that Immortality makes are more slight than those made in Rise of Ix, making this feel like a slight little tasty morsel of variability rather than both a balance patch and a content update rolled into one. I like the theming on these new cards, and I think that the bonus board is no more disruptive than a regular Faction Alliance track. It's good, it's fun, it's breezy. I have a feeling that folks who play Dune Imperium competitively, or even just regularly, might have disagreements with me on this stuff. They might prefer Rise of Ix's sandy stability to Immortality's wacky weirdness. But for my money, I would take Immortality any day. I don't want any more of the engine building and endgame squabbling. I want that early and mid-game where things are knowable and nasty. So, if you're thinking about getting into Dune Imperium, surely Shut Up and Sit Down recommends you get the base game and Immortality. Right? 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 In 2023, Dune Imperium got a sort of remastered sequel by the name of Dune Imperium Uprising, a title that features 2 pieces of functional punctuation and no pieces of clarifying information on what this box actually is.
Uprising, it turns out, is somewhere between a direct sequel and a remastering of the original. The board looks very similar, but is replete with chops and changes everywhere. We've got an almost completely unique deck of new cards, a new slate of leaders to play as, balance tweaks, a couple of entirely new mechanics, and plastic worms that have to be censored when viewed at certain angles.
And it's really, really good.
It's really good.
It's really good.
The game, not the worms.
No, not the worms, not at all. They are horrible.
Just not nice.
Here's the top line. If you're new to Dune Imperium, you should absolutely get this over the base game. It's a fantastic place to start that's no more complex than the original, but I personally prefer it tremendously. But if you play Dune Imperium like every weekend, maybe get this. It changes the shape of the game in quite substantial ways. I do think those are better ways, but maybe try before you buy.
So Tom, what does Dune Imperium Uprising add and also change about the original game, Dune Imperium?
We are going to tell them, and we're going to tell them
Together. Spice! But Tom, there's so much spice in the original game.
I meant these spice, they are spies.
Spies!
No
Not spice.
C in this one, but every other letter is still present.
This is just reminding me of that time I really ruined that curry with murders. Scattered across of Uprising's board are these tiny slots for spies to go and hang out in. By the assembly hall, by the Imperial basin, or just by the pool.
Spies are cracking. A tiny sliver of extra complexity dramatically expands the space of the game and addresses my own personal quibbles with turn order being quite so big a deal at the end of the game.
Keeping an eye on that circling worm and thinking about the impact of that is still a thing, but being able to spend resources to strategically know that you can always go to a place is pretty huge and definitely loosens that up a bit. They're just fantastic cylinders of intrigue.
They're added control, but they don't take the bite away from the worker placement, and they just let you maintain stronger relationships with the areas of the board that you're actually invested in. More on that in just a bit, but first... Worms! Ew. They're on the box, but they're in the game for real this time. The shadows of the big worms lingered large over Dune Imperium Regular Edition, and now they're a really pivotal and maybe controversial part of this game.
Worms are here, they're in your area, they want to chat.
Now,
Yeah.
pick up the phone to Worms. After a lengthy process of first allying with the Fremen and then picking up some maker hooks, you can give up a spice harvest at these spaces to instead hop on a worm and bring them into the combat. Now, at first blush, the 3 combat strength offered by these worms doesn't seem all that impactful. They're only 1.5 times as good as the regular combat cubes you can find basically anywhere on the board. The spice, however, is that they will double the reward that you take from the combat. 1 point? How about 2? 2 points? How about 4?
3 points? How about... Oh, God.
You'll learn. You will learn. It's frustrating, but you'll get there. You'll get there.
Now, I know this sounds absolutely bonkers, but there's some subtle tweaks here to the economies and shape of the game that means it sort of isn't. Firstly, it means, yes, you do have these explosions of victory points, but that means that the game also doesn't end up becoming this soggy thing that Tom doesn't like at the end where everyone has tons of resources. People go all in, they explode, they get loads of points, and then they win and you go home. Oh, stop,
Why did you do that?
Stop touching these. Just put them away.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're not 18.
Worming it up slams the game shut at exactly the moment that people have played precisely enough board game. I would like to go home to my family, please. The game stops at the point at which folks have built a deck they're pleased with when they're just approaching the event horizon of prosperity. Worms! They're good, they're dramatic, and important for maintaining biodiversity.
And sometimes worms don't even really play a big part in the game. You're just frightened of them for the whole game.
6-player Dune?
Whoa! We're going to talk about that?
We haven't played it.
We haven't played it. We're not
No,
going
we
to talk about
haven't.
that. It's
Yeah.
really hard to get together like 3 or 4 adults for an evening consistently.
And that's basically all that Uprising adds, but the more interesting matter is what it changes.
Across the board, Uprising is dotted with so many little micro tweaks that all on their own you don't even notice, but they crescendo, which creates something that feels really different but also looks identical to the thing you knew, like an evil twin, but a nice evil twin.
But nice.
Nice. The deck has been heavily tweaked, the board spaces are gently shuffled around, combined, removed, reworked. There's now a faction-specific space for each faction, instead of just the odd Fremen-only space one in the base game that stuck out like a sore thumb and made water a real pain in the bum. But great news, in this game, water's even more of a pain in the bum.
It's even worse.
But in a really good way. The exception to this is the Bene Gesserit. Their faction-specific space in this game is found on one of the tweaked default cards that you can buy from the shop.
Just as an aside, I love this thematically. Everyone else has a place that you can go, but the Bene Gesserit don't. They're in your deck. They're more of an idea rather than a place.
It's like, we've got water, we've got a network of fleet ships. We know someone.
know a guy.
Don't ask questions.
We're present.
What's in the box? A game.
Also, the victory point cards are completely different, with more points available later rather than sooner. And they've also folded a tiny set collection minigame into the batter for a smattering of bonus points awarded if the right combats are won by the right players.
There are a ton of tweaks here, and we could really get into the weeds of how each of them specifically tugs at the original game's design in a way that's pleasant and maybe a little bit naughty, but we're not going to get into that. What we're going to try and do is to tell you, like, what's the general shape of it? How does it generally make the game feel different?
And here's the bottom line. There's a radical shift present here in how resources are far more constricted than in base game Dune Imperium. Previously, the mid-game of Dune Imperium was defined by excess. Players gradually built up economies and got more and more resources so that by the end of the game, they could choose to go where they want to go, when they want to go, because they've got the cash to spare. Uprising only lets go of you in this respect towards the very end of your time with it, when the game is drawing to a close and the last few points are going to be scored. Until that point, the game requires you to play in the space it shines the most in, where prediction and outmaneuvering are constant, where you're eyeing up every single thing your opponent has access to so you're not going to be caught on the back foot.
It's true, and even when you do have those moments where it does come down to the first player token being the thing that gets you into trouble,
This little guy.
it feels much more like the overall shape of a strategy. When you get beaten to the punch on something right at the end, it doesn't feel annoying. You feel like you've just been outmaneuvered. And this resource scarcity in turn makes faction relationships feel like way more of a choice. It's much more impactful, it's much more meaningful. Each comes with a bonus you can get, sure, but equally, there's always a trade-off for the fact you haven't sided with another one. It amplifies the theming of the game in terms of like, well, if you want this thing, you got to go to these people, really kind of bringing the world to life and building the factions to life in a way that's exciting, even if you're not that big into Dune as a property. It's just a cool sci-fi thing where you're like, that makes sense. But also, everything is harder to get. Like, there isn't just like, oh, well, I need a water, so I'll go here. There is a method for extracting or trading for these things in these worlds, and they are limited.
Yeah.
And it means that if you are on a turn and you're like, I just need one more spice this turn, and then I can do this thing, that might be impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, water is a great example. There is one space to get it by default, unless you know the Fremen, and then you can get just a little bit more. It feels way, way, way more tense and close and tight than it did in the base game.
And at the same time, the addition of spies means you don't have that whole situation of like, well, it gets to my turn and I can't do anything I want.
Yeah.
Because if that is true, well, maybe you should have been spying on people.
Maybe you should have been clever about it, you ding-dong dingus.
Big doony
Yeah,
dingus.
big doony doofus. This leads to a shape of a game that I vastly prefer over the original. Dune Imperium has a fascinating early game, a tense mid-game, and a baggy end game. Uprising? It has a fascinating early game, a tense mid-game, and an explosive end game. Real criticisms come down to preference on the pace of the game you prefer. As mentioned earlier, the worms of Uprising can shut the game down sharply, but I find it happens at exactly the right time, crunching the experience into a satisfying arc. And some people might be here for the more open and economical engine building that's present in the original Dune Imperium. That's completely fine, but again, this is more of the game that I prefer. It's bonkers that my actual biggest criticism here is that I don't like the title. I think it's a misstep on selling what this game actually is. I think it gets in the way of highlighting the very real differences. This is not just an expansion or an add-on, it's a 2.0, and I think it deserves a title befitting of the change that's taken place to the shape of the game in front of you. What a game! What a series. What a fascinating bundle of decisions and cardboard. I'm so glad that we took some time to revisit this series. And that's it. That's all the Dune that we've got time for today, but we might come back and do a sort of follow-up thing where we talk about Simon's big new Dune War for Arrakis.
We might.
Huge big plastic box that's from the people who made War for the Ring, but
We might not.
We might not. We might be Duned out by that point. We might be
And there are so
tired
many
of sand.
new Dune games all the time.
They come out constantly.
I think
it's
we
crazy.
have a breather and then maybe
Yeah.
come back for part 3 of the Dune trilogy, The Wrong Boys,
I
and
was
How
wrong
to Be
about
Wrong.
Dune. Oh god, that would be so bad.
Thank you for watching our video of Dune games.
Yeah.
If you've enjoyed this, you can support us if you want to do that.
Yeah, we got loads of we got little bonus bits coming up. I should probably tease us in the newsletter. If you sign up for the newsletter, there's going to be a little video where I talk about Arcs, the new Cole Whirley game. If you want to hear about some first impressions, fresh new impressions, you can find them there.
People have been having a good time of it.
Yeah, they
people
have
get
been.
to have a look of like a new top 100 series. People got to look at that before it came out and to shape it a little bit. And they genuinely did. They had some good feedback.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
we
guys.
changed it and made it better.
Yeah.
So if you want to do that, consider it. If you don't.
Have you got anything else you want to do at the end of this video?
Just want to thank everyone out there for enjoying and believing in Dune, the desert planet. That's quite a transformative face in the way that it doesn't look like you doing a face. It's like, that looks like a different thing. It's cool. It's very cool.